Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Deb Powers, and I am the Executive Director for Leadership Northwest Missouri. On behalf of Leadership Northwest Missouri, we really want to welcome you to today's Continuing the Conversations book discussion. And our book today is So You Want to Talk About Race. We have a lot of returning faces today, and it's so great to see all of you. We have several new faces as well. And again, we welcome each and every one of you to the discussion today. And we look forward to what our facilitators have to share with us about this book, and also your thoughts and ideas that you would like to add to the conversation as well. So before I turn this over, I do want to do some brief introductions. Our facilitator today is Robin Westfall, who is our Missouri State Librarian. Hey, Robin.
Hey, everybody.
So Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft selected Robin to be the Missouri State Librarian in 2018. Robin has worked in libraries for most of her professional life. She's always believed that libraries must be a community gathering place where ideas and conversation can be freely exchanged. Robin is an alum of Leadership Northwest Missouri 2013 class. And because of Robin's belief in the importance of libraries and the importance of communication, it was really an idea that Robin had for us to open up these book discussions. And Robin, as state librarian, is always challenging her library directors in the state to be involved in their communities. Robin has shared with us that as a profession, librarians are one of the most trusted groups, and we need to use that trust to advocate for what is right. So Robin, we really appreciate you, and we appreciate your, coming to us with this idea so that we could all learn and share. And our group has grown quite a bit. So we thank you, Robin.
Well, it is such an honor to be a part of this. I mean, this is one of those things that goes down on your professional resume as well as your personal resume of things that we all get to do in our lives. So thank you, Deb.
Thank you. And then today we have also two co-presenters joining us again for our book discussion. We have Isaac Collins. Hi, Isaac.
Hello.
Yay. Isaac is a small business owner and co-founder of a nonprofit which teaches yoga and resiliency to students in under-resourced schools. He's a husband, he's a hopeful father, a Christ follower, and 2020 graduate of the decade at Missouri Western State University. What accomplishments in your life, Isaac. And if some of you joined us early on, we were talking about yogurt. So Isaac's small business that he owns is 3 Yogurtini stores in the Kansas City area. So some of you I know are joining us from all over the United States, but if you ever get to Kansas City, you need to check out the Yogurtinis. Right, Isaac?
Yeah, for the ones who missed it, they're trying to pressure me to buy a business in St. Joe and bring some froyo there. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But yeah, if you guys are in Kansas City, would love to, meet you in person. Let me know if you're going to be in the area. We have 3 locations around the city.
Excellent. I love Yogurtini. Good stuff. Our other co-presenter today is Dr. Tim Crowley. Tim is wearing this appropriate shirt today. Love, period. Love that shirt, Tim.
Thanks.
Tim has been speaking publicly for nearly 3 decades. His talks are based on his experience as a psychologist, as an adjunct university teacher, a leadership expert, and business owner. Tim has engaged, motivated, and inspired many companies, organizations, and individuals, not just in Northwest Missouri, but across the nation. Tim is always advocating for individuals to change their actions and attitudes in ways that will help us communicate better and become stronger leaders. And again, part of the impetus for us doing these book discussions was a lot of the conversation we had with Tim and with Isaac and Robin on how can we better communicate, how can we learn and educate one another in positive ways. So Tim, we thank you for all that you do and for all that you teach all of us on a daily level. So we are appreciative of having you all here with us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. And great to see the rest of the conversation crew. I just want to extend a personal thank you to every participant that showed up today. Thank you for taking time out of your life to be here, and we need you and we need each other to have these conversations. So thanks for showing up, participating, and contributing to these conversations. The last time we met, before we jumped into Robin's facilitation of asking us questions, I had a question for you. I've actually got that question and one other question. So I'm just going to quickly put out two questions, and then write your answers as quick as you can in the chat, and I'll bet we'll come back and refer to them. Question number one, what would you like to leave this conversation with? So you want to talk about race. At the end of these 2 hours, what do you want to walk away with? What do you want for outcomes? So if you could add some of your thoughts to the chat actually right now, just take a moment, pause, and reflect, because really, we really want this to be a dialogue and not a monologue. And we really are going to create time in this conversation to really hear from you. So what is it that you want? What do you want to walk away with? Last time, many of you, one of the strongest things was to be a better ally, to learn how to do things different. If we continue to do what we've done, we get what we've got. And this is about doing better. Many of you mentioned that as well. And in a moment, I've got one more question, and I'm going to toss this to Robin. Simon Sinek, he's a contemporary leadership guru. He's the guy who's written a book that says, start with why. Here's my second question to you. What's the deeper meaning, the purpose, the reason? What's your why for being here? What's your why? What's your purpose? What's the deeper meaning for you being involved in this conversation? And I'm sure it doesn't stop with this conversation. So if you can also just speak to what's your purpose? What's your why? What's the deeper meaning that's helping you to show up and to have these conversations, which we'll talk about. And we already know conversations about race, especially in the context of today, they are not easy. I do believe the more that we have them, they'll become easier. I've never left one of these Zoom meetings without feeling like I received a shot in the arm from each and every participant that showed up and sharing your voice and listening and supporting. And it's good to know that we're, as Deb said, we're all in this work together.
Yes.
So Robin, as we begin to finish up collecting thoughts, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. And Tim, that's one of my favorite leadership books. And if you watch Simon's TED Talks about starting with why and how to actually do that in every aspect of your life, man, I definitely encourage that. And isn't it interesting, Tim, that the things that we've talked about in these last three discussions, all of them go back to the leadership principles that were taught in Leadership Northwest, that really part of being a leader that we all have worked so hard on is understanding why these conversations are so important. So, you are going to hear us talk about some of the leadership concepts that all of us, maybe if we've been with Tim, have used along the way, and they really just intersect with what it is that we're doing. This is the third in our series, and I think I said this probably for the first two, but this one I really mean it. This is really the easiest read, the most accessible read of the three that we've done. I mean, it really answers the questions that sometimes we are afraid to ask or don't dare ask. This book, each chapter focuses on a lesson or topic. I mean, what other book have we read where one of the lessons or topic is, why can't I touch your hair? Or what if I don't like Al Sharpton? Those are things that we haven't really touched on in the other two books. And I think the more we do these, continuing the conversations, the deeper we get and the more comfortable we become with those sort of uncomfortable questions. Ijeoma, I've been practicing the name. Ijeoma, no. Ijeoma Oluo.
Ijeoma
Thank you.
Oluo.
Thank you. And I just practiced with Deb right before we got started, and I'm going to blame it on the migraine medicine. Is a Nigerian American writer. Her mother was from Kansas, a white person from Kansas. Her dad was from Dallas, Texas. She lives in Seattle, and she has been recognized as one of the most influential, not just writers in Seattle, but just personalities in Seattle. If you read her book, you'll see the comic nature to it. She's also done, there's some humorism in the way that she writes and other things that she's written. She describes her own work as being curt and blaring. And I like that because those are two words you don't necessarily think of as being positives, but they absolutely are positives. We need somebody who is not afraid to sort of be in our face when it comes to these really, really difficult conversations that we're having. So let's get started on the third in our series of continuing the conversation. So Isaac, I'm going to start with you. As we were reading this book, so you want to talk about race. Is it really about race? And why is it so difficult and hard to talk about race?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first off, I just have to reiterate what you just said, with this being the third book in the series of what we've talked about. I feel like every single time we're like, this one's our favorite. No, this one's our favorite. Like, legitimately, this one is my favorite book, and I didn't think it was going to be, because once you started, it's like such an easy read. But it feels like a conversation. It really does. She's just like telling her kind of personal anecdotes and then going into the stats, a lot of stats, which is really good. But diving into it, I love how she breaks out in each chapter. She goes over a question, and this one of, is it really about race? I think I don't want to say dumbs it down, but makes it so it's not as academic as the others, but something we can really understand on a fundamental level. And asking this question, is it about race? When things happen in the media, in the world that we're kind of discussing, and I think there's a lot of ways we can look at it, but if I'm just utilizing her words, she kind of gives two reasons of why it is about race. The first thing that she kind of talks about is how difficult and uncomfortable it is to talk about race. So a lot of times we want to kind of deflect away from the fact that it could be about race. And the second one is just a misinformation about how and why, in fact, it is about race, when someone looking in from the outside may or may not think that it is in that moment. And so what she references in the book, and what I've actually heard in my own life being a Black American, is, surely it's about class, not just about race. Like you can't always pull the race card. This is more of a class issue. It's a financial issue. And I would have to say fundamentally that's incorrect. And she speaks on this, and her argument for this is, the class argument infers that, Black Americans are disadvantaged because they just have a lack of money. And as we know through the work that we've been doing, really since George Floyd, died in May, is it goes so much deeper on a systemic and fundamental level of why, there's these issues and why it actually is about race when we talk about systemic racism, when we talk about police brutality, which we will get into, when we talk about school to prison pipeline, which we'll get into, and everything kind of in between. On that. And so some actually wrote down some examples of, some things that kind of debunk the class versus race argument. You know, if it was just about class, then if you gave Black people money, then it would be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's just not that linear. It's not that easy. So some examples of how it is so much more than that. And you guys have your own definitions and things that you have heard of the last couple months, but you know, lack of job interviews and hirings because of having a Black name. A couple of days ago, actually, the Wells Fargo CEO came out and said something that was actually, you know, he may have thought it was true, but it was a very ignorant thing. And he was saying, you know, they have a hard time hiring because there's not much Black talent. And I was very appalled by that, because I'm like, Black Americans make up 13% of this nation. There's literally millions of us. And that stigma says that Black people aren't as smart as whoever else. And those kinds of things go into the hiring practices. You know, even in the book, she gives up a couple references of how that works in the Black community with the workplace. Lack of lending from banks. You know, Black men getting paid 72 cents on the dollar compared to white men. Black women getting 67% or cents to the dollar. You know, if you live in a Black neighborhood, your home values are way less, so then the resale value is less. All those different kinds of things there. And then she gives 3 reasons on, you know, if it is about race. She said, if it's about race, she said it's about race if a person of color thinks it's about race. It's about race if it's disproportionately affects people of color. And then it's about race if it fits into a broader pattern of events that disproportionately affect people of color. So you guys will have your own that kind of come up. But for me, the one that kind of comes up is police brutality, when oftentimes I hear, you know, that wasn't about race, that was about this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that wasn't about race, it was about non-compliance or about this. But the numbers actually show against that. And when we get into that section, I'll actually provide some stats that she gives in the book. But yeah, I would say
she's writing this, Isaac. She is not. If it was just about class, she freely admits, she goes, "I'm middle class." You know, this is, she talks about herself, you know, and her upbringing a little bit in the book. And you know, I mean, that's one of her personal examples of stories she talks about. And that there's, you know, there's a part in the book where she almost felt like she had to apologize that I came from middle class, because there is that, again, that stigma that it's not just about race, and the class and economics play into it. And obviously that's a huge part of it, but it ultimately, systemically, again, I'm going to blame the medicine on that. It's about race. So
Yeah.
let's talk about, Isaac, what is racism? The common thread of all 3 of these books that we have discussed have been different yet similar definitions of racism. What is it about her definition of racism that you think is both similar and different from our other 2 authors' takes on racism?
Yeah, so I really liked it. So, you know, as we're talking about this, especially I see several names who've been with us before, but, you know, kind of like the basic definition of racism is, you know, a bad person doing something against another person that they're superior over, and like they're being racist based on something they say, based on something that they do, etc. And oftentimes when we come to a conversation, we are looking at it from a different definition of what racism actually is. And so that's why I've loved reading these books, actually getting people that are much smarter than me to give a lay of the land of what racism really is. And I actually saw it as the 3 authors have a very similar definition of racism. And the one that I love the most is Ibram Kendi's. I think it really looks at it the best way of kind of what that expanded definition of racism is, one that we can actually attack and actually make a dent in the racial injustice that's going on. And it says, one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions and expressing an anti-racist idea. And I absolutely love that definition. And I feel as if, you know, in a way, she kind of had the same thought, and so did Dr. Robin DiAngelo when we referenced that book. And I think it's important that we know the definition, or at least go off of that definition, so we can really take a stab at debunking and kind of getting rid of the racism that's going on in our country. Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that we've become comfortable with with these book discussions is that term racist, and how and someone who says something racist, that we understand that may be us, and that doesn't make us a bad person, but it just does certainly mean we need to check our thoughts and check our behavior. It's it's part of, I think, all of this is us getting really comfortable with that word. Not comfortable that it's existing, but comfortable with the definition of the word.
Yep. And knowing that we're not, even if we are trying to be allies or advocates, there are moments where we can sink into a racist thought or a racist action. And we can even be doing it if we know that we're doing it or not. However, it's not, like Kendi says, it's not a pejorative. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. You're also not labeled that forever. You can be racist in one moment and anti-racist in another. And I think that's a beautiful thing, to be like, hey, sometimes I do and say racist things. I'm not okay with it. I'm trying to get better. However, it happens because of certain norms that are taught. But I'm actively trying to rebuke that and trying to be anti-racist every single day in my actions and in my words, also in my thoughts.
Excellent. So Tim, again, one of the threads that's run through all of these book discussions is, what if we talk about race wrong? Is there a wrong way to talk about it? And how do we, this is again part of our vulnerability and being comfortable. Can you speak to sort of if there really is a wrong way to do that? And how do you think we should approach that?
So thanks for the question. I'm going to answer it, but I want to give you guys an update first if I can. So I'm just going to take you somewhere else. Robin had no idea I was going to do this. So last night I got a text from my son, Nick, and I think it's important to know these speakers well and to know that they're human beings and that they're really people with feelings and thoughts and lives. And so I don't know if you've heard, but so Ijeoma, she survived, her and her two children, a house fire. So her house was burnt up, and here's the post that she made. So I'm just sharing this as we can keep her in mind to help support her and all the work that she does. But here's the post she just wanted to share with anybody and everybody that follows her. And my son knows that we do this work. And so it shows a picture of the house, but you're not going to see, but it was a terrible fire. And she just says this: we're okay. We're okay, and that's what really matters most. And then she says, but, an expletive, but I won't say that word. But blank this year, I think this helps just to see who she is. She says, we literally don't have shoes, just the clothes on our backs, but we have the resources to recover. We are lucky in the most unlucky circumstances. Check your smoke detectors. Ours literally saved our lives. And I wanted to share that, and I wanted just to endorse the same thoughts that Robin and Isaac did about really the author of this book. And this is her life work. This is not a job for her. It's not a passion. It's her life work. Same as both what they have said. This book is so straightforward. If you want to walk away being more skilled, more grace at having conversation, I'm going to say, with Isaac and Robin, this would be my go-to book, 5 stars. Every theme, every story she talks, every chapter is a particular theme, and then she shares her own story, but she just says it in a way that it's easy to get. So back to your question. So what if I talk about race wrong? These aren't my words, and I'm doing my best to paraphrase hers. She says, absolutely positively, you will talk about it wrong. You will screw up. But never, ever, ever let that be a reason for not having the conversations. The very worst thing we could do is to feel so much discomfort about not knowing how, or giving an attempt and then retreating and never doing it again. So as long as racism exists, this is going to be uncomfortable, But she says it's really not racism or the conversations around racism that make it uncomfortable. It's the fact that racism exists. So she's encouraging all of us to lean in, and she shares stories about herself in every chapter. So in this chapter, she shares a story about her mom. So her mom's white, and she identifies as a Black woman, but her mom would just always say these things from a white woman's perspective, who knew that her two black children, could be anything and do anything they want. That had nothing to do with Ijeoma's experience of growing up. And then she came home from work one day and she got this voicemail from her mom, and she just cringed because her mom was like so proud that she made this comment to a person of color and to a Black man, and that she kind of put him in his place and realized that white people can be activists and supportive because she has Black children. And as the mom was leaving this voicemail on her machine, as the story went on, Ijeoma just kept cringing more and more and more. Well, she circled back and had that conversation with her mom, and it was hard and it was difficult, and her mom got defensive and her mom got hurt. But here's what they did. They didn't let that stop them from having the conversation. So here's some of her thoughts and suggestions. Know that this is not going to be easy. As white people, what we need to do more, it's that Stephen Covey 80-20 rule of effective communication. We really need to close this, open our heart and listen about 80% of the time. And if you find yourself in a conversation as a white person especially, and you're becoming defensive, what she recommends you do is take 1, 2, 3 steps back and just pause and ask yourself what's going on. And it's probably linked to something else.
Yep, absolutely. So, and this kind of goes right along with that, Tim, with that, obviously with listening to what someone else has to say. How would you respond if someone called you racist? I mean, her mom, obviously the conversation she had with her mom was very uncomfortable for her, and she talks about it from her perspective, but just think about then from her mom's perspective. I mean, it's not that she flat out called her racist, but I just got, just say that, I just got called racist. Now what do I do? I mean, is it again that listening to why someone thinks that about you and stepping back, or are there other components to that?
Yeah, I'll share my thoughts, and I'll certainly leave you with her thoughts, recommendations, and suggestions. So that's happened to me before, and I've always grew up just believing that my mom taught us to love all people, love, period. I was visiting my sister. I think I might have said this with a group a while back in San Francisco, and it was for a gay day parade, and there's all sorts of people of color and different sexual orientations. And I don't know even what I did, but my sister, Vaughn, who's one of my closest friends, said, "You are racist. I'll tell you what I did." And what I did then is not what I would do now if someone were to say that. I made a false assumption that my sister was judging me. I made it all about her. I got very defensive and I didn't listen. I never even asked her why she thought that, because I made it all about her. And I'm going to guess that's typically what most of us do.
Yep.
And all that does, and so for what it did, then I disconnected from that sister for about a couple of years and really kind of pushed her away. And it didn't have anything to do with her. It was about my unwillingness and ability to self-reflect and examine my own thoughts and to inquire more information from her.
Excellent.
So today she would tell you to listen, and we've been saying it, but to listen with understanding. And as Isaac reminded us of Stephen Covey's word in the last Zoom call, listen with the idea to not respond, but to really hear. And when we do that, that's how we develop compassion. That's how we develop empathy. She says we need to make sure that we lead with positive intentions. So if we're being called racist when we share something, make sure that we're doing it for a reason that's going to lift people up versus pull people down. If we're called racist, don't create a fight, and a fight that you have to win. And Isaac, unfortunately, can probably share too many of those, and one that he recently was in, and a social media piece, which in a few minutes, Isaac, that'd be a good time to talk about this.
Yeah.
she says more than anything, we need to all, and I'm going to guess the people on this Zoom call, you guys already know this, we need to take a deeper look into ourselves and ask ourselves why that's so hard for us and why we're so defensive, and that all this change, it begins with inside of us and not other people.
And that's fantastic. We're getting ready to open this up for conversation, and we would love to hear your ideas on this. But Tim, I have one more question for you, and this is it's addressed probably more in this book, but it's addressed in obviously both of the others, and actually probably White Fragility, I guess maybe it was addressed more. But what do you think of the term, if you've ever been told, check your privilege, or someone needs to check my privilege? Speak to that a little bit about what that means and why, again, just like if you were called a racist or someone told you said something racist, really, we all need to check our privilege and not get so defensive if someone says that to us.
You know, I think when we're told to do that, for many of us, our white fragility starts to scream and rise and yell up, actually. And so right now, as people are listening, I'm curious if any of you have ever been told to check your white privilege, if you've had that experience and what that experience was like for you. And so I can remember the first time that it was actually a colleague of mine in the diversity and inclusion experience brought that concept to my mind. And once again, this good old white boy, I was so defensive and so angry, and I was so hurt, and I was feeling so damn sorry for myself. I wasn't looking at other people. So I grew up in a family of 13 with so much darkness and abuse and poverty and just terrible, horrendous things. So I thought I was this overcomer and this person who that was tremendously resilient and could rise up. That has, the very fact that you come from tough situations has nothing to do with white privilege. Privilege is this: no matter who we are, we all have some privilege. I have more than white privilege. So on this Zoom call, I'm looking, it's predominantly women. As a man, I have privilege that women do not have. As a white man, I have a lot of privilege that people do not have. And until we examine it, I don't know how we begin to understand like why women aren't paid as much. Isaac, I say this in every Zoom call, I will never know what you go through every single day as a Black man, as a person of color. And I think most people didn't even know that about you until you started speaking up on these Zoom calls and sharing more of your own experience. So what she recommends is that we all just slow down and pause and once again, reflect and look at what your own privilege gets. So she's a female, she's a Black female, she identifies as Black, she also identifies as queer. And that chapter, Robin, she talked specifically all about her privilege. Yep. She was so humble, and she's talking about all the privilege she got. So she talked about growing up middle class, and she talked about because she's biracial, she's a lighter color, and so with that came all sorts of privilege. And I'm thinking, oh my God, if she can like open up to her privilege, damn it, I better at least be able to be brave enough and strong enough to look at my own. And to
this is a fantastic time to for a conversation amongst the group. We would love to hear from you, your experiences about either some of these tough conversations that maybe that you have had, or times when you've had to check your own privilege, or maybe there's something you've either posted or said that you realized later was racist. So we would love to hear from you, and because we've got 22-ish people. I think we can monitor it pretty well. So if you want to just unmute yourself and speak, you can do that. If you want to put something in the chat, we could take it that way. We've done pretty good at making sure someone's not talking over each other. But this is an opportunity that we would really like to engage and hear from you. And in particular about, we have some things in chat that we can.
I think one of the things that I was having this conversation on the phone with one of my coworkers this morning about how our family and friends respond when we try to have these conversations. Yeah. And when we start to talk about what privilege means and their first reaction is, if they acknowledge it, it takes away from them. It always kind of gets flipped around, that it's not about the issue that we're talking about, but it's about, if we admit that we have privilege, then it takes away from the fact that I worked so hard to get where I am. And it kind of goes back to that, you know, the pie is only so big and only so much of the pie can go to people. And so we, you know, she and I were talking about how we can't seem to have those conversations because that's the first place that it goes. And I think that, you know, she and I are women, you know, we understand the privilege that we have because we're white women, but we also see and acknowledge the struggles that we have as women working in a professional world. But I do think that we both are guilty of walking around oblivious to the fact that we have that privilege. And it's not until we sit down and have the conversations that I stop and go, yeah, but wait a second, you know, I also am very fortunate to have had X, Y, and Z in my life, you know, growing up on a farm, growing up, you know, with a good work ethic, growing up having plenty to eat and plenty to support and having love in my home, and, you know, all these different things that affected how I turned out and how I grew and became. But I do think that I've spent probably most of my life being completely oblivious to the fact that I was privileged. And that's a conversation that's starting to happen now on a regular basis, but it's hard to, this isn't casual conversation that you just start up with somebody. And it seems like, you know, trying to get to a place with another human being where you have that comfort level where you can say those things and initiate those conversations. I mean, I know in my life, there are specific people that I know that I can open that door and have that conversation.
Yeah.
But then there's all those people that I can't open that door and have that conversation. And that's a challenge because those are the people we need to be having the conversation with.
Absolutely.
And how do you initiate that, as Tim was saying, when that first response is to push back and be defensive, and, you know, and I wish I had those tools to be more tactful. I don't know if that's the right word. It's not really the right word. I mean, I think I'm willing to give another person grace. I know that I stumble and say the wrong thing. So I know that I am capable of giving someone else grace in that. But, you know, this person that is reacting very negative to me when I start to talk about this very touchy subject, they're not even giving themselves grace, you know? They're just like, oh, you know, no, I can't go there. So I think
Well,
what I'm looking for here is a toolkit. I'm looking for a toolkit, how to initiate that, how to have those conversations.
let Laura, let me give you some thoughts, and these are her thoughts. I'm just going to reiterate them. And so I'm going to unpack. I think I heard at least 3 things shared from you. So the first one is about the privilege part. What she really wants to communicate is that everything that you did to overcome any challenge, abuse, adversity, it doesn't take away from that. She encourages us to claim that and to support our friends and families and coworkers that have grit and have resiliency. All we're talking about is, what has my privilege given me that it didn't give Isaac as a white male versus a black male? And so that's that piece. And so we kind of break it down and really focus on that other part. The second piece is, she says in her book, this was not written to touch every person. And those people that are not ready to even look at it and are going to burn it, she says, maybe that's not the place to start the conversations. So you are right. There is something about people that we have a relationship in which we can trust, and there's like some love and caring and support. And yet she also says we cannot remain silent anymore. So there's kind of a contradiction. So for me, I'm careful about, and I'm selective about the conversations and the people who I have, but I will never, ever remain silent in public if I see somebody mistreated ever again in the rest of my life. And so I would encourage us all to be advocates and voices of support, and to speak up for anybody that's being hurt in any one way. And Gandhi, we all know him as the guy who says, be the change, but he also says this, my life is our message. So we used the word nudge in a couple earlier Zoom calls, so we don't have to clobber people over the head, but if we can create some type of connection and give people a nudge, and hopefully somebody else will give them a nudge, and they'll get another nudge, and hopefully with a lot of nudges that some people will get it. And there are people on this topic. So I was looking at the chat list, and I really love what Helen had to say. I didn't love what she had to say, but I appreciate what she said. She says, I'm scared of how our country has accepted racist rhetoric as of late, and I want to be able to address issues better. I think in some ways we have to take the fear that can come from that, and we have to have a fighting spirit, and we have to take that fear and we have to turn it into action. But we can be like wise warriors. We can find places in which we can connect with people. So I have a brother who I love immensely and his partner, and they're always just saying things that just make me cringe. And in the old days, I was silent, but I let them know I love them enough that I'm never going to remain silent again, and I speak up. So from her opinion, choose your battles wisely. Sometimes it's better to lose a battle and win the war in the bigger picture. Know who you are and continue to speak out and speak up. And we'll give some suggestions at the end of the book that she says can really help us all have better conversations. I have the privilege of knowing you. You're such a reflective person, but then what you do, you turn that reflection into action, and that's what she's wanting all of us to do. You know?
And it's baby steps. In some regards, it is. Those little conversations that you start with right at the beginning. So, Isaac, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would actually. So I love the question, Laura. First off, amazing, amazing question. And I hope this resonates with someone else. So I think that in my experiences of having this conversation, what I have found is most people are defensive. However, just because they're defensive doesn't mean that they're not going to chew on it later. You know, they may not hear you and be like, I agree with you, you're right. That takes a big ego check to be able to do that in the moment. However, some people, I don't want to say most people, will be able to take that in and think on it, meditate on it, pray about it, whatever they do in their own time, and then find a little bit of truth in there maybe. Or maybe it's a seed that's planted of many more where they're like, gosh, people keep telling me to check my privilege. And they figure out that the common denominator is them. And so, people of faith in this chat, I think of, in the Bible, Jesus talks about just planting the seed. The Holy Spirit's supposed to convict the spirit to be able to have a relationship with him. It's not about me as a Christ follower talking to someone else to get them to believe in Jesus. It's the same thing here. We have to take more pressure off of ourselves and put a higher importance on having the conversations, but think of it as planting the seed. So maybe it'll break through, or maybe you're the first person who's ever said something and they need 4 people to say it, or 4 things to be seen. Or maybe you're the last one. Maybe they need 13 encounters and you're that 13th, and now they're willing to have that conversation and be like, oh, I finally get it in the way that you said it. So that's how I've had to look at it, because I've been in encounters just like you, Laura, where it's like people aren't getting it, or they don't want to get it. And then I have that moment where I do have a conversation and I break through to someone and they're asking all these questions because they had this newfound discovery. And those are the moments that I live for, but I'm not allowing the other ones that don't work out how I want them to discourage me anymore in the moment. So hopefully that helps someone.
Excellent.
Yeah, it just takes a long time, but have that mentality, be unoffendable, and be ready to be shot down, but be resilient in the conversation and be ready for that one where they're like, that's a really good point. Tell me more. And then you're going to be ready.
Yes. And does anybody else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of the number of times, it's so true because, I did social marketing or an MLM for 5 years recently. And it's funny because we always said that it takes 7 connections for a person to consider your proposition, whether that proposition is replacing, a soap with a clean soap, or trying a new workout, or any 7. So when you're talking about something that 7 people or 7 opportunities or 7 questions about it, 7 separate experiences for something as small as buying this cup versus a Yeti, and then you compare that with something that is looking at their reality and they feel judged for their past, their thoughts, their reality, it's going to be an exponentially larger number for more people. And so just keep that in the back of your head, right? 7 things for me to buy this cup, which was actually a gift, but 7 things for me to buy this cup or this. And then when you're talking about something as complex and complicated as their entire past, their morality, their religion, I'm like sneaking in the background, their religion, their thoughts on a specific race or culture or socioeconomic class, it's going to be higher. And unfortunately, people don't see reality, right? People see their reality as their past experiences have shaped their reality. And that is their reality. And you can do nothing about that because that is the reality that they've grown up in. My reality is so different from Tim's or Isaac's or Deb's or even Robin's or Laura's as a white female growing up in America, right? Completely different from Isaac because he is a different color and of a different race and of a different gender. Tim and I grew up in similar socioeconomic classes with primarily, the mother raising us. That doesn't mean that we have the same reality. And I think it's so important to remember that the further your reality or your perception of reality is from that person you're trying to talk to, that number of instances is going to be substantially larger because those realities are so completely different. And your perception and your thoughts and feelings and your past experiences are dictating that every single time you make a new memory. And so I think that's just so important to remember, Laura. It kind of goes back to, how do you make those? It's all an incremental step that you have to do with someone you trust. I have trust in Tim and Deb and Robin after these calls, and Isaac and Rob, and Anna and Cindy, because I have that trust there. I would not have that same trust or level of comfort or grace potentially with someone else, grace for them or grace for myself. And so it's so important to remember in these times of political and cultural and just societal upheaval in the United States among any topic. It's not just race, it's any topic.
Yeah, excellent point. That's going to kind of lead us into the next question we have, but I'm not ready to move on if we want to still talk about this a little bit. Isaac, and I don't know if this is, I know we're going to bring this up at some point, but and listening to you and now listening to Kaylee talk, this reminds me of, I guess it was 2 weeks ago maybe, that you had a post that went viral. And that post spoke to the people that booed at the game. And what I think that I came away from with that post, and I hope this is what you came away from it as well, is that post was shared 18,000 times. Is that right, Isaac?
Yep.
So you impacted 18,000 people who, and the reason they share that post is because they see something in that resonates with them. The other part of that is that if you read the comments, and I did until I had to just stop reading the comments, and about what some people were saying about that, you realize as I was listening to Laura talk, there are some people who just either they're not ready for the conversation and probably never will be ready for the conversation. And those are people that we have to let that go. We have to say, I'm done engaging. But what I hope when you look back at that is the fact that you were impacting friends of friends of friends of friends, kind of like that 7th cousin twice removed, that you had that, there was that impact, and that obviously some people are certainly ready for the conversation, and that sharing of your post may be what initiates conversation for them with other people.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, just for some context, guys, the Chiefs game, the first game of the season, the home opener on Thursday night, I imagine all of you watched it or heard about it, but at the beginning of the game, they did a moment of silence. And during the moment of silence, when they first said they were going to do it, there was a bunch of booing. And, whatever reason why there was booing, some people say it was at the moment of silence. Some people say that it was about the Texans coming on the field, even though they were already on the field. Whatever the reason is, I made a post that said to the ones who were booing, and also to the ones who were booing, at their houses who weren't at the game, for the moment of silence. And it did go viral. And it just a lot of different views, people agreeing, people not agreeing on it and whatnot. But like Robin was saying, it was more the context of a lot of the comments on people who didn't agree that really caught both of our eyes, where it's like, wow, it's hard to have a conversation about this without there being people who don't agree with it, even with my personal thoughts. And it also reminded me that there's a time and a place to have those deep conversations where people really take a chance to get it. Because I think some of those people who didn't agree, if I were to talk to them face to face, that would be a proper avenue for there to be breakthrough in having that conversation. But since it was on social media and everything is heightened on social media, it wasn't the place for them to be able to receive the message of what I was saying and to all the way understand the bigger problem. Yes, it was booing at the beginning of the Chiefs game, and they may be looking at that micro moment, but I was talking about the macro issue we have in our country. But really what I was focusing on is the issue we have here in Kansas City and probably St. Joe and Northwest Missouri, just as a whole. I've lived in several places in Northwest Missouri, so I understand. But yeah, it was just really interesting. I think we saw all a range of emotions, from allies, people who were trying to be allies but were rebuking what I was saying because they just didn't quite get it, to people who were just like, don't care, this is football, just play football, to people who were very racist, everything in the middle. And it was a culmination of what we're seeing in our country right now.
And I think part of the point should be about this is social media is the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, it has all of those components to it. And the good on that experience is the potential was that there was 18,600 people who were having then a conversation. It could have been the first conversation they had ever had with friends, or it could have been just an additional conversation that they had on this topic, and that resonated with them. The bad is the fact that his post brought out, I think, some of the things that social media allows people to say things that they would never say to his face, or just not just to his face, to anyone's face. And so that's the bad, and it just exacerbated just how much of an issue this is. And that's also then part of the ugly. So we have to take, we have to take all of that, and it is for a lot of us is the main way that we're connecting with people.
Yeah.
That how we discuss this on social media can be impactful, but yet could also be very, very discouraging.
Yeah.
So
I love it though, because I think as leaders in our households, in our organizations, in our groups, our networking groups or church or workout or whatever we're doing, we are called to lead people positively. And so even though not everyone agreed with it, I don't take back my words that were said, because it did inspire conversation to happen. And I think that it's very important that we're not silent on things. And so after some good pep talk from my friend Robin there, who sent me an email encouraging me on and telling me not to focus on the negative, it's important for all of us to remain leaders. And that means we have to remain outspoken on things. Pick your battles and know when to speak up and when not to and whatnot. But it's very important we stay steadfast on leading people in a positive way.
excellent. Anything else? We would still love to hear from you. Any comments about that in particular, or about how to engage and have this conversation on social media. We still got a lot to cover, but certainly we want you involved and engaged in this as well.
Rob speaking?
Yes, I think you might be on mute.
It doesn't look like it, but I don't hear him.
Nope, I don't hear you.
You might want to hold your mic up further, Rob. Sometimes when I use those on my computer, the microphone on the headphones doesn't like to work.
Or maybe try to unplug your headphones as well and just talk into that computer.
Yeah, that might work best. I think it's
Oh, let's try that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it is the headphone situation.
Okay.
That's the problem now.
Oh,
My question is my mom, who is she's pretty racist and she's older, and it's a discussion on how to either discuss it or not to discuss it. I don't want to call her out on it, but some things she really says that are so inappropriate that it makes me cringe. And it's like, you realize what you're saying. And I know she's my mother, so I'm curious on Isaac or Robin or anybody, how they handle those kinds of situations with maybe elderly parents and people from a different generation. And she gets extremely defensive. She does not have any foresight to process it and even think about it. She has a reflexive attitude, and I get it. I get it, but it's a difficult. It's kind of it's not. I love her. We get along pretty well, but that really bothers me about her. Part of me says she's never going to change, so why bother? But the other part is when she does say things, it really bothers me.
yeah.
And anyway, so any thoughts on that? I'd love to hear.
I've got some. Hey, Rob. So what did your mom teach you growing up? What are some values that you learned from your mom? What is it about your mom that you learned to love and appreciate growing up? Because you said you love her and you care about her. What did
Great, an advocate for me as a person with a disability growing up. I was born hard of hearing. My mom had rubella, so she was able to give me the early therapy and training that allowed me to be pretty functional in society. At least I think I'm pretty functional. So she's done a great job with that. She's taught me a lot of values in terms of being competitive, and whether it's for sports or academics and whatnot. So she's done a lot of those positive things. But my grandfather, her father, was also very racist and outwardly so, and it really bothers me. She grew up pretty wealthy. She had just the reality was she had people working for the family that were African American, Black people, and she has kind of that mentality, back in the 50s, and so she's not as rich as she used to be, but she still has those kind of those people are pegged into society in certain ways. You're this, so you belong in this kind of a caste or some sort of a position in society. So she still has that mindset, and it's just difficult. But she has a lot of really good traits as well. So again, my dilemma is whether just to leave it alone. She's getting old. She's still really healthy, so she may outlast me. I don't know.
Here are my thoughts. Can I give you some feedback? So what if you could bridge it from, and what I think I heard you say, because of your mom being an advocate for you, your life was better and is better. Like, she stood up for you and advocated and made things right. She gets what it means to stand up when you believe in something and when you love something. And I don't know if that could be a bridge, and to tell her, thank you for doing this for me and how it's helped me. And you can say, and Mom, and I've learned to do that for all people, whether it's people that have a disability, or whether it's Black people or people of color, or for women who aren't represented. And so I've really learned this from you, and it would be easier, Mom, if we didn't have this conversation, but because I love you so much, this is an important conversation. And it's going to be your call.
I like that.
Yeah, because typically most of us do what you mentioned. It's easier to walk away and not to have the conversation. But what if, because of her love for you and admiration for you, what if you're one of the few people that can probably get into that woman's heart? Because like hearts can close and minds can close, and maybe it's your words that can get into her mind and her heart. And then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I don't know what you lose by that. And so I would always encourage to have those conversations, unless they just feel like you're just never going to. But she's gonna understand that. Maybe you can help her have a paradigm shift, and at least you'll know that you've done your very best. So I think you've got something to do before you decide not to have the conversation. And I know you well. When you speak really clearly and precisely, and you're a great communicator, and your whole life work, like, it's been a privilege to get to know you. Your whole life work is about advocating for people that don't have a voice and helping them to find their voice. So just because it's a hard conversation doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It's not easy, but I think if you come from that point, hopefully it'll get easier. And
I will say, as a
I'm gonna
person
hope
who,
Bob can have a shift.
yeah,
I think
I will
you're
say,
saying it like
Rob.
that. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well,
Kate.
I was going to say, in terms of, so I grew up in a single parent family with my mother. I have a sister that we share a mother who is passed, and I have one sister that we share a father. I think, like Tim, I was fortunate to grow up with the predominant parent that I did. My sister Cheney, who is 6 years younger than me, she will turn 27 this coming week. She was not so fortunate. So our biological father that we share is a very bigoted in every sense of the word. We're not just talking race. We're not just talking culture. A very bigoted, angry human being in general that is very much a victim of the world. And fortunately for my sister Cheney, she has been dating a guy for 6.5 years who treats her like gold, and very much like I'm sure what Isaac and his wife have experienced from some people, friends, family, and strangers. Reggie happens to be a very dark skinned, so he is not mixed. He is a very dark skinned Black individual, and Cheney is white. Our father is, well, father, loose term, very adamantly against it for a multitude of reasons. The predominant reason is because Reggie is Black. And to tell you the truth, Rob, while it's a very difficult thing to navigate with a parent, I have found in recent years, obviously, since I'm not close with him, I've distanced myself from him greatly, not just because of that, but because of a multitude of reasons over the last 10, 20 years. And at the same time, now that everything that has come about since the death of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, in the last 9 months or so, it has been something that, ironically enough, is a time where I have talked to him more in the last 8 or 9 months than I have in the recent 4 years, I would say. And he will make comments. Some of them I agree with, in terms of we should not be ripping down statues or burning buildings, because we shouldn't do that anyway. Yes, there is a reason it's happening. Yes, there is a reason to do the things that people are doing. Boston Tea Party happened for a reason, etc. But 80% of the comments that come out of his mouth are things that are blatantly racist. The use of my least favorite word in the entire world, which is obviously the N-word. And I think it's easier for me because we are not close to put him in his place. And for my sister, the opposite is true, because she is very close with him. She grew up, she was raised by him, 80% compared to her mother. And I'll be honest, she has texted me or called me several times in the last week, because she's like, I don't know what to do. She's like, I am so happy in my relationship. Reggie is a phenomenal human being. He makes me a better human being. He treats me so well. Dad will never accept that. What do I do? And I said, honestly, Cheney, you have to get to the point where you either confront it with him once and see what happens, and then you go from there. And she finally made the decision, Rob, to call him last night or the night before, and because she was supposed to go down there, we're talking small town, southeast Nebraska, grew up on a farm, didn't really get out and see the world, meet people of different races, cultures, colors. And she said, I've got to either have a conversation with him, or I've got to kick him out of my life completely, because this is ruining my peace and my happiness. specifically for her because she is in a biracial relationship. And she had a 30-minute conversation with him. She said that she maintained her calm and collective nature, which is huge in a conversation with the two of them, especially with him being an explosive personality. And she said, in the end, he's not going to change. He has been this way for 57 years, but in the end, he knows where I stand. He knows I will not tolerate it. I will not tolerate it in terms of Reggie. I will not tolerate it in terms of any race or religion or anything. And he knows that if he ever uses that specific word in a conversation with me again, that it is done, that I will no longer talk to him because that is degrading and derogatory. Now, maybe it will change their relationship dynamic and only theirs. Maybe he will continue to do that with other people. But long story short, she made it known that she didn't agree with it. And I have as well, and we are his only 2 children. And so in the end, you know, even if you are slowly or not even changing the heart of that person, I think it's important to remember your own heart. And by having that conversation, you know that you are potentially mitigating or minimizing those types of conversations that are very difficult for you, and to protect your peace as a human being who advocates for all people, because I know that you do that. But then it also starts to chip away at that hardened heart on that specific individual for that specific reason. And I think it's just important, and I've said that all along when we had these these discussions in Leadership Northwest, before these conversations started, the hard conversations are the conversations that we have to have in 2020 and beyond. And that's not just for race, and that's not just for diversity, but it is the hard conversations that will make the difference. It is the small conversations that are hard with strangers or family members that will make that difference. And if we are not willing to do that, then we should not ever expect someone to change their opinion. If we, as a person who believes that, is not able to adequately advocate for people that are different than us. And I think that Cheney was a phenomenal example of that this week, because she really she couldn't sleep, right? I mean, I'm sure that's happened to you, Rob. I know it's happened to me with him and with my father, and I'm not near as close, I'm sure, as you are with your mother. So just remember that even if it doesn't change her heart or her mind, it will change the dynamic of your relationship with her for the better if she now knows it's not okay to speak that way around you.
It's fantastic. It's about saying what's right, not saying what's the most comfortable. And I think, and I'm looking at Julie Jones's comments in the chat, let's not seek the Republican answer, the Democratic answer, but the right answer. Let us not seek to fix blame for the past. Let us accept our own responsibility for our future. I mean, absolutely, that applies. Isaac, is there anything you would like to add for Rob's question?
Yeah, Rob, that was a good feedback, and thanks for sharing, being vulnerable. I think going off what Kaylee said, she nailed it. I think it starts with one thing. If you feel like it's going to keep eating at you and it disrupts your peace, you have to say something, just for your own mental health and your own well-being. I also think it's important that we give the people around us, especially the ones we love, the benefit of the doubt to be able to change, and know how we feel about something, and to explain why it's wrong. If we don't say anything, there's a 0% chance of them changing or really understanding how we're feeling. And so I would say just have the conversation. Above all, this is someone that you love, has been obviously your whole life, and gave you life. Go into it with love, a loving, open, accepting, and non-judgmental heart, and that's going to give you the best results, period. So do that, have the conversation, and then kind of be limber, I guess, with the reply. And if it's something where it's not going to change, then you reassess the situation and take step 2, and whatever that step 2 is kind of going to be up to you on that. So yeah, I think take that step, and then we can have another conversation about it.
I remember, Isaac,
yeah.
One of the most important things I learned as being a parent was to say to my children, I am not mad at you. I am upset about your behavior or what it was that you said. And I think if you approach it that way, I mean, like, I think that both of them have still said that, yes, you are I love you very much, Mom, but your attitude about this is something that bothers me. And I think that goes a long way. And hopefully she would understand that you're not coming at this as it's not, and it's truly not a personal attack. It's just trying to understand where she's coming from. So
Yeah.
Rob, I hope that helps.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, and you probably have this, we do at the end is just to make sure you have all of our contact information. Not that we're the experts on this, but certainly the thing I've learned about doing these is the conversations that we have are so powerful and helpful. A lot of it's because we are lay people and we're coming at it from our own experiences. So certainly know that we're going to want to hear we're going to want to hear how the conversation went.
I've got one more thing I want to just throw in there. Rob, I think your question, I bet almost every one of us has a person like that in our life. And so I think your question is one that we ask ourselves every day. Should I have that conversation? Should I not? What do I do with that parent? What do I do with that brother? What do I do with that sister? And so I love your question because I think it's something we all struggle with. And we know, and we all have histories with people, and we know what works and what doesn't work, yet we love people. And so I get your idea of like, okay, it's probably easier if I don't say anything, but then at the end of the day, the week, the month, your life, that's what you got to live with. And that's usually when I think regrets can pop up, wondering if you could have done something better. And so I just would encourage all of us to be hopeful, but to be that vessel of change. And so we all know one of the most spiritual songs ever was Amazing Grace. But I don't know if everybody knows the backstory. It was written by John Newton, who was a slave owner, and his whole livelihood was built around taking parents away from their children and spouses away from each other. And he was in the human flesh business. And in one dark time, by the way, we're in a dark time, in one turbulent storm, we are in a turbulent storm in America now and in the world. He thought he was going to like lose his life, and he was so frightened and so afraid. And he had that epiphany, and he had that aha. And in one moment, this guy who was such a slave owner and encouraged everybody to do that, and that they own people's lives. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now I see. And somehow, individually, collectively, we all have to hang on to some kind of hope in this work, because I don't think this work will ever end, and it's too easy to get overwhelmed. So thank you for bringing that up, and thanks everybody that responded to it. And we all need to do our individual work and support each other, and yet remain hopeful. I'm glad we're not in this alone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For my team, we're going to go ahead and skip number 5, just because as I'm watching time, I want to make sure that we get to where we need to. And if we have time to come back to that, I will. So just heads up as you're looking at yes, we actually do take notes and try to follow something along. It's called a kind of a script, but I think this sort of leads into the next kind of set of questions really have to do with really sort of the anger that we see, not just from our young people, and also what's in the headlines about police brutality. So Isaac, I'm going to turn this one over to you. We started at the top of this where we said, is it really about race? And by it, we're talking about what we're experiencing in today and have been experiencing for the last 400 years. But let's talk specifically about police brutality. And is that really about race from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think that there's a better time to answer this than right now. On literally on the heels yesterday, we just heard that Breonna Taylor was murdered months ago, and they had the trial or whatever for the 3 police officers who busted in, shot her while she was sleeping, and 2 got off scot-free, and one of them got off with a slap on the wrist, essentially. And we look at these things and we have these conversations about, is police brutality really about race? Well, it kind of goes along to the first piece that we talked about, where is it about race just in general? And I laid out those 3 points, and I think that if we reference those again, really the third one, we can really look at it and be like, okay, hey, is this about race? And so the third one was, it's about race if it fits into a broader pattern of events that disproportionately affect people of color. So I think it's kind of obvious that people of color are disproportionately affected by police brutality. Yes, I do think that it happens to every single race, every single gender, both genders, but it's disproportionately happening to people of color. And she actually gives some stats here. So we're talking about driving. Black drivers are 23% more likely to be pulled over than white drivers, between 1.5 and 5 times more likely to be searched, while shown less likely than white drivers to turn up with contraband on them, more likely to be ticketed and arrested in those stops, and 4 times more likely that Black people will be killed by cops. Even when not arrested, there's still a lot of things that go undocumented, like being abused, being dehumanized in those stops, and which I have so many stories of my own encounters of being Black and having these kinds of things happen to me as well. There was also a study done in Oakland Police Department in 2016, where they handcuffed 1,466 Black people for non-arrest traffic stops. And in that year, only 72 white people. And within that, Blacks were 4 times more likely to receive force. And so a couple studies, a lot of numbers there. And obviously we can go back and forth and debate it, but I think the overall thing, especially since talking to allies and advocates, is police brutality is a real thing, you know? And it's unfortunate, obviously, and those are things we're trying to work towards, and we'll talk about things that you can do, but just mentioning one thing is we can really put a lot of pressure on our local governments and really using our voice and voting, being really dialed in. I don't know about where you guys are from, but talking about voting, in our last election here in Kansas City, only 4% of Kansas City, Missouri's population voted. 4.
Wow.
That's not going to get it done. And there's no way for 4% to be an equal representation of Kansas City, Missouri as a whole. So it is very important that we get literally up to 100% so every voice can be heard, so we can have accurate voices being heard in this. And so for me to go against the police brutality that is happening, we must put pressure on the powers that be, that put people in those systems in charge to be able to, what I like to call, police the police. You know, defund, that's a different conversation. I do believe in police reform, and I do believe in policing the police in a way. And I think those are healthy ways where we can support our men and women in blue, while also giving them a system of checks and balances, just like every other industry has, to make sure that they stay on the straight and narrow to keep us safe and not get into the police brutality portion. So, yeah.
So Isaac, let's talk about other institutions besides public safety. One of the things that I think one of the chapters in this book is why are our students so angry? So let's talk about right now, this election, from what I've seen leading up to this election, and not just this election, the protests that we're seeing, it is a lot of young people. It is a lot of Generation Z that really we're seeing that anger. But let's talk about particularly for Black students, not just in this time right now, but even as you were going through the school system. You know, why are our students so angry? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of different parts to this that go into it. I know Tim has some thoughts on this as well, but I'll just share mine. There is weirdly something, you know, every time we go about something big like this, we have this thing where young folks they seem to just get it. Like, they seem to fight the good fight for what's right every single generation. So you know, my parents have been saying this for a long time, that, oh, those young folks, if we were younger, we'd be fighting and all that kind of stuff as well. And now I'm like 30, like I'm not like young, but I'm not old, and, you know, kind of in that middle thing. And I'm kind of saying the same thing, like, oh, if I was in college, I'd be doing a lot more, be a lot more vocal. And I think back to those feelings that I had when I was a student, and still the feelings I have as a Black man now. I think that students not having they have the voting power, but not the platforms to be able to do it, they're sounding off on the things that they see. I would say they haven't been subjected to the world as much as we are, so they don't see it in front of political lenses and other lenses that just get put in their face like we do. And so they're just like, right is right, wrong is wrong. And being a Black man, I would say the same thing, where it's like, it's kind of easy, it's way easier to see it when you're a part of the group being oppressed and when you're yelling for help, but you're not being heard. I think the students are seeing how our systems are broken, because right now, I mean, it's tough being in college and everything that they're going through right now through a pandemic and not being able to have jobs and everything that's going on. I mean, college and high school is like you're going into a situation where you're around potentially all different kinds of people, and you're seeing these things, and we'll get into a cultural appropriation. And, you know, these people that are young, they are on social, so they're interacting with different kinds of people than they've ever interacted with before, and they're seeing all these opinions, and I just don't think that they get it. Not from a fact that they're stupid, not from a fact that they don't understand what it is in like a rational way, but they don't get how we're still fighting these battles. You know what I mean? And so having conversations and talking with college groups and talking to high school and college kids in my stores and with my nonprofit, they're so much more aware than we even think that they are. And I think it's being pushed up against that wall for so often and feeling like there's no door to walk through. Like it's just their voices and their actions are futile. And I know I kind of felt that way with this Breonna Taylor case when it happened to the cops, where it's very obvious what happened, but just didn't get the verdict that makes sense, which actually gives justice in this scenario. So,
Excellent. Tim, what would you like to add to that?
I'm going to talk about younger kids, but I have a question for Isaac first, real quick. So,
sure.
Isaac, what can you share or help us with this? Because unfortunately, anger in adults right now, and adult Black people, is why so many white people or racist people, they focus on the actions of that anger, and very rarely do they ever seek to understand what's underneath it or beneath it, or the why of the anger, which is 400 years of oppression. You get that, I get that. What can we do to help those people that don't get the anger? How can we help them to look at more than just the acts of rioting, for example? It's like, I get why people, this has gone on for generations and why they're so angry, and yet oftentimes people won't even begin to look at or understand, or there's no compassion or empathy. Any thoughts on that with your own experience, your dad's experience, your grandfather's experience?
Yeah, so I was talking to my dad who's 72, my grandpa who's literally 100, turned 100 last month, talking to them because they all were living during civil rights and before. I can give you so many different reasons, but the number one that they talk about and that I will talk about in my experiences is the lack of affirmation that we actually have a problem. Mm. All of you on here, your allies, your advocates, you will affirm that there is an issue here. Do we know how to conquer it all the way? Yes, we're learning these different things, but do we think it's going to happen in our generation? No, that's fine. At least we're working towards it. But the times that are the most frustrating is when we're talking to people. But again, going back to Ibram's definition of racism, we're fighting against the policies and the procedures that are in place to hold those racist policies in place. It's things like that are happening in the news that are blatantly racist and blatantly are keeping us in the spot where racism is okay and justified, and we're acting like it's not happening. Like we're just blatantly like, no, that's okay. So it's the lack of affirming. Like a lot of the anger comes in, and again, I posted about this last week. Like we say a lot of things and we have a lot of political talking points. It's literally along a political line. Democrats have the things that they say, Republicans have a thing that they say, and very few are actually caring about the actual solutions that are in the middle. And it's the lack of affirming what we can actually do to push this initiative and push this this movement forward for actual change, actual equality, that's getting missed here, because we're either not recognizing it at all, or we are doing things just political show to act like we're allies, but we're actually not helping. Where I would say what I have seen a lot of, and this doesn't just go down for every single person who's on the right or the left, but I've seen that, and my parents have voted, predominantly Democrat, but I've seen a lot of Democrats on the left who have been doing a lot of showmanship to say that they're allies, and then on the right, a lot of ignoring what's actually going on. And I would say that's the biggest thing, the lack of affirming on a global scale, like what's actually going on and how we can demolish these procedures and policies that are in place.
It's tough. So I'll tell you what she talks about in her book. She first begins to reference her son at the age of 8. And how many of you wave your hands or put a clap or some kind of signal if you have children or have had children, or you got children and they're grown into adults? How many of you know that kids, by the time they're 7 and 8 today, they're pretty wise and they can judge character on a dime? So can you imagine, this mother is brilliant. So imagine, she's just connected with her son. So there's a story in the book where her son was forced to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, she talked to the school teachers. He worked out an agreement when that he wouldn't have to say it. He could just remain silent. And every kid throughout the school year has an opportunity to lead the Pledge of Allegiance. They even worked out a deal that when it's his turn, because he does not believe in the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll tell you why in a moment, that he could say a poem. Well, there's another teacher the next year who didn't make that agreement. Not only did not make that agreement, but told him that if he would not say the Pledge of Allegiance out loud in front of everybody, that he would be upsetting veterans and that he would make veteran men and women very mad. So just that mother she was livid when she heard that this is what this teacher did. And the reason the boy could not say the Pledge of Allegiance is because he doesn't believe in the line liberty and justice for all. And he says, Mom, that's never been my experience. It's not been my experience as a Black person that there's liberty and justice for all. Kids are smart, and I think kids are way more with it than certainly when I was growing up. And I'll bet even Isaac's generation, I'll bet kids are just so sharp and so smart. And then he has a half brother who's white. And so his half brother, because of white, he has privileges. You know the privilege that his white brother can do that this Black boy can't do? He can take his play guns and he can go outside in the yard and he can play with his play guns. Well, this young boy knows that he can't do it because there's a Black boy about the same age who had a water gun outside and got killed because the law enforcement officer mistook it as a real gun and shot this kid. And so kids are smart and you can't pull the wool over their eye very easy.
Yeah.
And so they're angry. I also do think though, it's that the very youngest generation, kids that are 8, 9, and 10, and 11, and 12 that have so much empathy and compassion, that they're getting on board in this movement and they're creating change because they're not afraid to speak up. They're not afraid to yell from the mountaintop. They're not afraid to call someone out. So in some ways, I think children are going to help clean up the mess that people my age have created.
Yeah, I agree. We need to listen to them.
Yeah.
So the anger is there for a reason. And boy, if we could all listen better and do better.
And I think the good thing, I think Isaac talked a little bit about this, the fact that a lot of our kids grew up on social media, it has been for them a platform for them to be advocates. You know, you look at the last 10 years or so, a lot of the issues that we face as a country, gun control being one of those, you do see a lot of, especially teenagers, really involved and passionate about some very specific issues. And I mean, I think it's great that we have, that they have an ability to have their voice heard more than just the megaphone, that they're really making an impact. So I'm gonna move on.
Let me say something real
Yep.
quick. So just imagine this, you guys. So you're her son, you're 8 years old. Guess how every day starts? Every day for that kid when he goes to school, how does it start? He has to start saying a lie. He has to lie about something he does not believe. Now, how's that for setting the tone for a successful day, a day of learning, a day of just learning and growing? And so, boy, I get their anger, and I hope that more of us can just lead with understanding and use that 80-20. Listen so much. If we listen to our kids and we take their guidance, we take their direction, they literally will help us figure this out. So sorry for interrupting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Isaac, let's talk a little bit about, there's a couple of topics I want to cover before we get to the wrap up, if we have time. And you touched on this just a little bit, about what would your definition of cultural appropriation be, and why is that such a bad thing?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, so cultural appropriation is something that you may not look at and think, wow, that's racist, but it is degrading, and it does not help us get away from tropes and these like societal norms and stereotypes of different cultures, different races, etc. So what it is it's the exploitation or adoption of another culture. So if I'm going to give an examples, it's the stealing or using of fashion, art, literature, language, music of another culture. So I think of this comes out a lot for some reason when we talk about like holidays, especially Halloween, because we're dressing up. And so a couple of things would be, you know, if you're dressing as a Native American or doing anything Native American and you use a tomahawk or a headdress or things like that's cultural appropriation. With Black America, it's doing those tropes that are Black, like the sagging of the pants, using blackface, things like that. And I just mentioned it, like Gen Z and millennials, a lot of their culture and a lot of the things that they do and say comes from Black culture. The slang that they use, like lit or litty, or all the things that you hear that comes from Black culture, it comes from Black music, it comes from these things, and it is adopted in a way that's like kind of celebrated. So you can really look at it like it's appropriation or it's appreciation, kind of half and half, you could say. But other ones would be like, I don't know if you guys remember this, but you know, to go political a little bit, because this whole thing is a little political. The Democrats, whenever they're trying to show appreciation after George Floyd died, they wore kente cloths and they knelt for 8 minutes and 46 seconds on air. And the gesture may have been good in their hearts, but the wearing of the kente cloths, that's cultural appropriation. And it's just one thing where it doesn't push us forward and it doesn't help with what we're trying to do. And it's just something to be aware of, because some of that could be offensive, like wearing the headdresses, the blackface, things like that. So I love this book so much because she talks about things kind of like Robin said, like she talks about these topics that we don't think about. Like, okay, like why I don't want people to touch my hair. Is it okay if I don't like Al Sharpton? What is cultural appropriation? It's like these things that we don't really learn about in this movement on social media or in the news, but are very important topics to get a well-rounded view and to see things that are important. And you may be thinking, okay, those don't seem like a big deal. Again, to the certain people of color, they are. Like if I see someone who doesn't talk a certain way but uses slang when they're just around me,
Yeah.
that's offensive to me. Like I have a buddy who I'm around him quite a bit, and he never ever says the word brother. But when when he refers to me, he always calls me his brother, and that is offensive to me because I'm like, you don't speak like that, you don't say that, you don't talk like that. Why are you doing it to me? And so yeah, cultural appropriation. Any questions on that? First up, I guess, because I guess that can be a little confusing, but does that make sense to everybody?
I do have one that I was going to ask you anyway before. So in terms of the difference, and I guess this is something that I've thought a lot about in terms of, um, so when Adam and I travel certain places, or even when I was in college, I went to Greece and Turkey and bought some things that were obviously gorgeous, that I loved anyway, even if they would have come from the United States. If you are wearing it because you like it and it's not something that's specifically religious or religious in that cultural aspect, and it's because you appreciate it and find beauty in it, do you find that as being completely different, or does it depend on the setting and the specific thing in terms of, let's say, jewelry or shoes or hats or whatever it may, clothing, from a different culture?
I think it would be a case-by-case basis. Was it a certain kind of jewelry that came from?
Yeah, from where I traveled to, or, I bought some gorgeous like woven scarves that were made in Istanbul or in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
And so things like that.
I think a couple different thoughts on that. The main one being, I think how it's used really matters.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why what the Democrats did was offensive is because they were using those kente cloths as a symbol to be able to get their agenda by of like I was saying earlier, there's certain things that you do that actually help the movement and certain things you do that do not help the movement. What they were doing in that moment did not help at all. It actually brought a lot of criticism to them from all sides. But I think buying certain jewelries and that kind of stuff, I mean, those things were created to be worn, to be shown off because they're beautiful, Yeah.
That's kind of how I took it. It's completely different than, let's say something, I would never go buy okay, would I buy moccasins made on a reservation and wear them as shoes? Absolutely. But would I buy a authentic Native American headdress and wear it for Halloween? Hell no. Right? Like completely different things. And so, thank you. I just wanted to get your take on that. Especially since you had brought up the kente cloth, obviously. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think that answers the question in chat from Reference Services, which is my coworker Laura. So if a kid does want to dress up as Native American because Pocahontas is their hero, that's really not. That's appropriate.
I think that the reason why the headdresses and certain things from Native American culture is offensive and considered cultural appropriation is because I have a lot of friends who are Native American and they don't dress
right.
They don't carry on tomahawks. They don't wear the headdresses unless it's some sort of ritualistic thing. And so it's a trope of, hey, here's how these people look all the time, when their culture isn't being necessarily celebrated, especially by our country, which we know all the stuff that our country has done to Native Americans. It's the same thing where if someone wanted to like showcase, and I know this is different because you're saying someone about being a hero, but like same thing about people trying to showcase what their idea of a Black person is by sagging their pants, wearing gold chains, and putting their hat backwards. Like that would be a cultural appropriation. Or and this one's kind of like too, because it's a hairstyle, but a lot of people consider people who aren't Black, like doing box braids and that kind of stuff and cornrows, as cultural appropriation because that's a Black hairstyle.
So I'm trying to understand this better, and I appreciate Tammy's question. So she wrote on there, this is Tammy, and my dad also made me my own teepee because I loved it so much. So I think what I hear you saying, Isaac, a lot of it's the context. So if a child is wearing a Native American Indian headdress for Halloween and they're making fun of, but not like Tammy's family. It sounded like it was about honoring and respecting. Do you see that? Is that the difference? Is what we do with that and what it represents for us? Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, and so I'm just giving the information so everyone knows what it is. In
Yeah.
cultural appropriation, I don't know why I have a hard time saying this word. I think I took the medicine that Robin took. I think there's different tiers to it. There's this tier of like, okay, this is a cultural appropriation, but it's not offensive. All the way to this is a cultural appropriation. This is very offensive, and they should stop immediately. Growing up, my grandparents, they lived in New Mexico and Arizona, and they had their whole house in like Southwestern theme and Native American theme because there's reservations down there. There's a lot of Native American people living down there. And so should they have stopped decorating their house in it? No, because a lot of that was made by Native American people. So I would say like having a teepee or making a teepee or something like that, I don't think that's a bad thing. I know the big conversation is around the headdresses, and I know we're getting that a lot here because of the Chiefs. No, the tomahawks, and the Chiefs are like cutting it out altogether because of the backlash that they've gotten. So I would say the context of it is a good way to look at it.
Excellent. We're going to, I'm being very cognizant of the time, and we're glad that you've already spent an hour and 43 minutes with us. But I think what we're going to do now is we're going to just talk about some of the things that we can do next. And obviously talking is great, and we are so blessed that you've joined us to be a part of this. And I am going to try to share my screen. But one of the things, I think one of the most important things, all three books that we've read are about what can we do next. And I'm going to be selfish and tell you all that y'all in your communities, it would be great if you had book discussions or contacted your local library. Kayla, I know you go to Rolling Hills. Michelle Mears is one of my dear friends. I'd love to have book discussions on this. But just to continue the conversation in your own communities, I think is really important. I'm going to share my screen. But some of the probably less obvious ways, maybe, that we can, and I'm using the dismantle the system because that's what Ijeoma talks about in her book as ways to dismantle the system. And maybe that sounds a little harsh, but we're going to go through a couple of these. And Isaac and Tam, I want you to just chime in and talk as well. The first one is the vote local and for diverse government representation. I think they attribute this quote to Tip O'Neill, possibly, who is way before a lot of your generation as far as a politician goes, that all politics are local. And I totally believe that's the case. And one of the things that I'm doing, I live in Columbia, is really doing more research on the candidates that are running than I typically would. And it's more than about how they feel about some of those traditional issues, but whether or not they truly are allies and understand what it means to be anti-racist. So it is important, obviously it's important to vote in general, but definitely vote local and for diverse government representation. We don't see a lot of diverse representation in Northwest Missouri, but it is something to encourage and hopefully will become the norm at some point. Isaac, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so we're doing a big push for this right now in Kansas City about, one, getting people out to vote, and especially in the local elections and even the state elections, because as we know, people come out every 4 years for the national one. Still not nearly as many people as they should, but for the local ones, pretty much everywhere, it's not many people are actually voting. So the important thing to do is vote local in your election, do your research with the politicians and what they back and everything like that, and make racial justice a top priority when you are demanding things from these people. we the people have so much more power than we even know. And elected officials, they really want to please us, and they're listening to us, we hope, at least. And so the more we talk about these things, the more they're going to have to put that into the policy and even talk about it. If we don't talk about it, they don't have to have a racial justice policy if no one says anything about it. But if we're talking about it and we're demanding it, they're going to have to figure out a way to make our towns, our cities more diverse, but also have some sort of plan around racial justice. So very, very, very important.
And this is not just about candidates. I encourage you to look at the amendments that are on the statewide ballot. I know one in particular, but really do your research ahead of time so that when it is time to vote, you will understand what policies they're either trying to change or add, and whether or not those are anti-racist policies when you read them. So definitely I encourage you to do your research on the issues that are on the ballot, not just the candidates as well.
That's a good point.
And the other, to get into schools, when I was in Chillicothe, I was also on the school board while I was there. And honestly, I had very, very selfish reasons for doing that. And now if I was to do that again, I would still do it for selfish reasons. And my selfish reason for doing it was just to make sure that the policies that the school was, anything that the school was doing as far as funding and policies, personally, I wanted to make sure that the library was included. And not just the public library, but also the school media system in the libraries. But it certainly was a selfish reason for me to get on there. And once I was on the school board, then it became more important for me to look at all of the policies and procedures that they had in place and to determine whether or not that they were fair, or that they definitely advantaged one group of people more than the other. That's one way to get into schools that the author talks about. And I think there's other things besides obviously being on the school board. I know that that's not something everyone can do, but there's other aspects of getting in schools that I think is important as well. Isaac or Tim, if there's anything on that you want to add.
Yeah. So the same thing about putting pressure on your politicians is the same thing with your school board. The same exact thing. The school district. Do you know what the racial achievement gap looks like in the schools? Are the textbooks and the curriculum whitewashed and they take out the Black history, or are they actually studying and learning about figures, Black history and figures who, had a big part of what was going on growing up? So you're not just learning about Black history in February. Same thing can happen. You can demand the racial justice in the school district and with the school board as well as the politicians.
And Isaac, you mentioned this the other day, from K through 12 and through college, how many Black teachers did you have?
Yeah, so I have never had a Black teacher in all of school, from pre-K to 12, even in college. Never had a Black teacher or professor. So, as we know, representation is huge.
Yeah.
And then what does she mean by bear witness, Tim? What do you think when she's saying one of the ways that we can dismantle the system is to bear witness?
She's speaking primarily to white people, and she says, as white people, when you see Black people and people of color being mistreated, you can't do what you typically do. You can't observe and remain silent. So she gave several different examples, like if they're being pulled over for any reason and police are involved in mistreating them. You don't need Black people to be running your video cameras, but white people can do that. And white people can stand up, and it's unfortunate, but typically if a white person says something, police are much more likely to respond. So if you see something, not only do we have a responsibility to say something, but more importantly, we have a responsibility of doing something. And it's really white people helping and speaking up more now than ever. Silence, we contribute to the problem. We're complicit. If we remain silent, when we see wrong things being done, we are contributing to the problem and allowing it to continue. And it's a big reason of why we've gotten to this place that we are today and throughout the US.
And that, if that's the one most important thing you can take away from this, and you can use the word silent in many different contexts. Silent in that you don't have those tough conversations, or silent that you don't say something when you see something happening, or silent about what's going on in your schools and your local government. Again, you know, as Tim says, I mean, that's part of what the problem is. The next couple go hand in hand. Support people of color owned businesses, support music, art, books by people of color, and then conversely, or boycott businesses that you know of, either locally or at a national level. Isaac, earlier on, when you had said that about Wells Fargo and what the CEO said, that there just wasn't much talent among Black applicants for positions that they have. I mean, that's right there. It's something from a CEO of a company like that. You know, we do not have to do business with a company like that. Isaac's own business. I mean, I would pick going to Isaac's business, not just because he's my good friend too, but just because I want, you know, I would want to support a business of a person of color, and make sure that that's my first go-to. Isaac or Tim, anything you want to add to that?
I want to give Isaac a shout out. Everybody within the next couple months, you own 3 yogurtinis, right?
Yep.
Vote with your feet and vote with your pocketbook, and go buy some yogurt and say hi to Isaac for his employees. And Isaac, what would that mean for you, honestly, to know that somebody was here and they are coming to see you, to support you? What does that do for you?
Well, 1, it makes me happy, and 2, allows me to feed my family, so that's awesome. 3, I love the thought of supporting, you know, Black-owned businesses and businesses owned by a person of color, because on the, you know, and people are so confused by this, and I definitely get it. I understand it on the surface of how they're like, well, why should we support this business and not all business? That goes back into the Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, but just how we're talking, and there's people in our lives that don't like or put people of color in a box of they are this, don't do life with them, or you can't date them, or don't be near them, or I've gotten this hundreds of times. Lady walks by me and clutches her purse because she thinks I'm going to steal her purse. That same thing is happening with businesses that are owned by people of color. And it's because of, hey, we don't like them, but it isn't always that serious. It's also, hey, I wasn't raised around people of color, so what I have been taught is that person of color is violent or disruptive, and I'm just a little nervous. I don't know yet, but I'm a little nervous. And so frequenting a person of color's business allows you to be in there. You get to meet them. You get to see kind of the culture, how they do business. It normalizes it for you and takes away that prejudice of this person is X, you know, fill in the blank there. And it also helps them because Black businesses traditionally do less money because of several reasons, but that is one of them. Also, even though it is illegal, people of color have much harder time getting loans lended to from banks. And a lot of it is based off of their names. Same thing happens in the interview process. If they see a Black name or it's checked under ethnicity Black, the percentage of loans and the percentage of job offers go way down. And so it helps to visit those businesses to help them out and fill in that gap, but also to open your own eyes to how Black people actually are and not just how the media is telling you that they are.
Yes, excellent. Excellent.
I don't know if you have a chance to read Donna Smith's comment. It says, what's the opposite of boycott? Don't know what you call it. But I love deliberately patronizing the good guys and publicly acknowledge them, sometimes in person, sometimes just on Facebook.
Love
Thanks,
it.
Donna. And Donna, I don't know if there's anything you want to add. If she's still on here.
I am still on, but I was on mute. Sorry, I had to find my my picture. I really just want to say how much I appreciate being included today. I'm one of those outliers. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, co-chairing the very new Social Justice Steering Committee of Sandy Springs, which is a small city in Metro Atlanta. So I've really appreciated the conversation, and I've actually participated in a lot of these, and I found this one the most productive, the most candid,
Wow.
honestly, the most meaningful. This is the first time I've been a part of one of these conversations where I really wanted to come back.
Wow.
So
I love
Donna,
it.
we will make sure that you get the recordings of the first two that we discussed. And now that you've been to one, you are now part of the crew.
That's
Heck
right.
yeah.
Well, I genuinely appreciate that.
Okay, good. Well, we'll make sure.
Thank you.
You know, we never know. You know, the numbers are a little bit lower than what they were. The registration numbers were high, but a little bit lower than what they were. It's you know, it's hard to know with timing and everything. But just like Isaac's post getting shared 18,000 times. Sorry, Isaac, I'm going to keep saying that over and over. I'm so proud of that. If you leave here with something that you can take back and impact someone else, that's the whole purpose of doing this. And yes, we all, the four of us who put this together selfishly, get so much out of the prep for this, and we are energized by what you all have to say to us, definitely. And so selfishly, we want to continue, even though our lives sometimes are getting in the way. But Donna, just hearing that and hearing from a first timer that how much this, and someone who's not in Northwest Missouri, knowing that impact is there. I just want to, there's a couple of these other make the change things I want you all to see. And these to me are sort of obvious. To give money to organizations that are seeking change. And there are so many of them out there that are seeking change. Support the increase to the minimum wage that benefits so many folks across, not just those people of color, but certainly that aspect too, but women, single women in particular. And demand college diversity. For some, that's going to be hard when you hear Isaac talk about the fact that he made it all the way through college in St. Joe, which is somewhat diverse, but to not have a single educator or have one educator that whole time that was a person of color. These are little steps that we can take. Tim, Isaac, anything you want to add? I do want to open this up here right at the end for some additional conversation. I also want to tell you, you will get all of our email addresses. If you are looking for someone to help facilitate a book group, I certainly could do that for any of you who need that assistance. And Isaac and Tim and Deb could help y'all in any other ways. But we are looking forward to continuing the conversation with you. So I'm going to go back and I'll leave that on the screen. But any other questions or comments? I want to be very cognizant of your time. We know that we could stay on for another 2 hours, but certainly we all have other things to get to. So
I'll just share a few closing thoughts of my own. And, I think this work is a collaboration. It's a collective experience. We're all in it together. I don't think it has an end date on it. I don't think it will ever end. I just want to encourage everybody to remain hopeful. Make sure you're taking good care of yourself, and be that agent of change, and know that change can happen. Right now, there is something happening in America, unlike any time in my life, and I'm 62 some years old. And Isaac, I'd say in your father's, in your grandfather's life, and there's something collectively happening, and let's all stay focused and let's all continue to be ripples of change. And so thank you all for who you are. Thank you for what you do, and continue to commit to this work, and never doubt, never, ever, ever doubt that what you do matters. So thank you all.
Isaac, anything you want to add?
Yeah, so I love to end with this, but you know, as you all are doing this work and you are trying to be better allies and you're trying to be better advocates and whatnot, you know, continue learning and then take action and do it. But also just give yourself grace. How we got here, how we are in 2020, took literally centuries. and it's not going to be fixed overnight. And so, no, it's going to be centuries until this is healed. Will racism ever go all away? 100% no, but we can chip and take big chunks at it. But give yourself grace, because we need you in this fight. It is exhausting, and it's okay to rest. And know it's a privilege to rest, because people of color can't, because they live it every day. However, you don't have to feel guilt because of that, and you just give yourself grace. Rest, hop back in it, and join the fight again. And if you do need encouragement, reach out to the Continuing the Conversations crew, and we'd love to talk to you and love on you and just be able to have a conversation with you, because you're important. We may not even know you, but we love you, and we just really appreciate you guys doing this work, because it's hard work, but it's meaningful and purposeful work.
Get the book. Get the book. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Get the book. I couldn't say that any better, Isaac. That's one of the things that we always sort of in our conversations with as we're planning these is about how important it is to give others grace. But the most important thing to do is to give yourself grace. And it's just critical to be able to do that. We will be back. We're still working on what's going to be our next conversation to continue. But certainly, since you all have registered for this one, you'll know as soon as we know what we're thinking about doing next. Deb will make sure that everyone in this session, especially you newbies, you get a link to the recording of the first and second sessions that we've done. Anything else, Deb, you need to add?
I think you've covered everything. Just want to thank everybody for attending today. And I do think the question that we asked, what will you do differently? I hope that we can all think about that as we move forward. And we look forward to seeing you again on a future conversation. Thanks for joining us.
And you know what? We'll hang out here in the room. So if you have any other questions for us, anything else you want to talk about, the four of us will hang out in the room for just a little bit. And thank you for spending your Thursday afternoon with us.
I do apologize. I've got to jump off and jump on another Zoom meeting. So
Okay.
bless you all, and take care and be good to yourselves. And
Thanks, Tim.
the good
Thank
work.
you.
Yep.
And we can all get together then sometime next week.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate everything. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.